My talk title today is Everyday Compassion, a Journey of Enlightenment. And I want to really start with what I mean by enlightenment. This is a word we hear all the time, and a lot of times I'll hear even spiritual teachers say, one day we'll be enlightened. And I want to offer a bit of a different point of view. And it really is a question. What if we're already enlightened? What if our true nature is already one with divine energy? We come into this world as that frequency, as that vibration, and then many of us get taught to believe that we're something other than that. So it could be true that enlightenment is a process, and it can also be true that it is a moment-to-moment decision and awareness that we have of our true nature. So even the idea that there's a journey of enlightenment implies that we are going somewhere. And the deeper truth in my experience is it's already who and what you are. You are already enlightened. It's just a matter of remembering that moment to moment and returning to our true nature. I'm honoring today a woman that I met who changed my life, and her name is Helen Brownell. When I was 20 years old, I met her. And at that time, I was in one of the darkest periods of my life. I had just come out of an addiction. I had spent many years believing I was broken, damaged, not good enough. And meeting her in 1986 changed my life dramatically. And the truth is, I have dedicated my life's work to her. She made her transition in 1998. And at that point, I dedicated myself to being a mouthpiece or a conduit for her profound messages. And she changed the trajectory of my life simply by her incredible presence, her beingness. She was someone who embodied a greater reality, a deeper truth of her own wholeness and perfection. And simply being that frequency had such a profound effect on me, and it literally changed my life. It changed the way I viewed the world. So why everyday compassion? I want to start with a story that speaks to the title and honors Mary Helen. I believe it was 1992 or 1993. I went on a journey with her to India. And we all met at the LA airport. At the time, we lived in multiple different places. 6 of us went on this journey, this spiritual journey in India. And she had a health issue, so she and I stayed behind while the rest of the group went on to India. And we said, we'll meet you there. So we had 24 hours at LAX, and we made the best of it. And there is a moment, a story that happened, a situation that happened that instantly changed the way I view the world. So I'm delighted to share it with you today. We were in a very busy airport, and we were just kind of hanging out, waiting. I don't know what we were doing, but we were just hanging out in the airport. And there was a young mother, I'm going to guess in her early 20s, who had an infant, and the infant was crying very loudly. And you know, of course, many people were beginning to become aware of this baby crying, let's put it that way. And the mother was becoming really agitated, and she started to really be what we would possibly consider abusive toward this baby. She was yelling and screaming at the baby, and she was trying to get it to stop, and she had all of this anger coming up. And most of the room, myself included, seemed like we were judging her. How dare you talk to your baby that way? You're an abusive mother. I remember the narrative in my head, in my early 20-year-old self, having a perspective that how could she? How could she do this to her baby? And what I witnessed was profound. Mary Helen stood up without saying a word, walked over to the young mother, and I heard her say to the young mother, I was a young mother myself at one time, and I understand how difficult this can be. How can I help you today? And she took the baby, and she held the baby, and she sat down with that young mother. And I didn't hear their conversation. It might have been 5 minutes, 10 minutes she sat with this young mother. What I experienced was her choosing to serve this woman rather than judge this woman. And it was at that moment that something shifted within me, and I recognized that we have a choice in how we view the world. We have a choice in how we show up in the world. And I started realizing that we have a moment-to-moment decision to make. I can either judge or I can love. That experience changed me because I realized that it was possible. And I had spent many, many years judging myself and judging others. And that experience was something that was really profound for me. Many, many years later, sometime in the 90s in San Francisco, there was another young mother, and she had a stroller, and she was pushing her baby one stair at a time down the stairs, and this man started yelling at her, "You shouldn't be doing that to your baby. You shouldn't be rolling that stroller down those stairs. You're going to hurt your baby." And I remembered that experience with Mary Helen, that she chose a different path, and that path was a path of service, of love, of openness toward this mother. And I don't know what happened with that mother and her baby, or what the experience was like for the other mother going down the stairs with her stroller, but I do know the impact and the effect it had on me. Those two stories brought into focus the recognition that we have a moment-to-moment decision to make. And when I wrote my first book, Conscious Being, I wanted to dedicate an entire chapter to Mary Helen. The truth is, I've dedicated all of my books and all of my work to her, but I wanted one chapter to be specific to the fundamental teachings that she demonstrated. Mary Helen was someone who would no more do a talk like this, that she never did that. She always sat with a person one-on-one, and she wasn't a teacher. She was a way shower. She demonstrated what it looked like and felt like to live an awakened and an enlightened life. And so when I sat down in contemplation and went into meditation and visioned what I wanted to offer as the basic teachings of Mary Helen Brownell, I came up with the 7 spiritual truths. And again, she did not teach these to me. She did not write these in a book. She simply lived this, and her message was so profound for me that I made it the anchor of this chapter, and in truth, as I've already said, my life's work. So I want to go through these 7 spiritual truths that Mary Helen taught me and is teaching the world, even though she's not here in the physical form. The first one is, there's nothing wrong with you. And as I shared with you at the time, I felt extremely damaged and broken. I felt like there was something deeply wrong with me. I was carrying so much shame. I had disconnected from my true nature. And I did have a fundamental core false belief that I was broken, damaged, and there was something wrong with me. And she would say in her beautiful Southern accent, "Darling, you're so precious." And I remember recoiling from that because I could not at that moment take that in. But a part of me could. A part of me understood that there was a place within me that was still whole and perfect. But I had built a whole set of armor around my heart. I had built this whole structure of being, a personality that believed in my own brokenness. And of course, as we know in New Thought teachings, if I believe I'm broken, I believe you're broken. And if I believe I am damaged in some way, I will see that damage everywhere I go in the world. So this fundamental and simple yet powerful teaching, there's nothing wrong with you, became so foundational for me because I started exploring that as a possibility. So rather than agreeing, yeah, you're right, there's nothing wrong with me, because at the time, I couldn't quite take that in. But I could be in that question, what if there's nothing wrong with me? Now, in my current state of awareness, I'll put it that way, I, have changed this not to there's nothing wrong with you, but to that you're whole and perfect, right? Recognizing that there's a place within each of us that is whole and perfect. Her second spiritual principle was there is only one of us here. I remember a story of a student who went to a master and said, "Master, how do I forgive others?" And the master said, "There are no others." Now, this sounds really great, right? We talk about oneness. We talk about each of us being a perfect expression, a perfect emanation of the one power and the one presence. We talk about that as our foundational principle in unity teachings. But to really live that, to really recognize that there is only one of us here, imagine for a moment with me, imagine a world where each of us actually knew that there was no other. There was no us and them. There was no one separate from me. I believe in 100 years, 200 years, we will look back on this time and we will say that we were beginning to understand that we're all one. For me, most of the time, that has been an intellectual concept. But there have been these moments where I've touched reality and I've realized at a very deep level that there is indeed only one of us here. Perhaps science one day will understand that we're all cells in one organism. For now, I lean into that possibility. What if there isn't an other? What would it create for my life if I were to understand that I'm not separate from, that I am one with, that each of us is actually a perfect expression of the one power, that each of us, when we talk about the expansion of consciousness, what if we actually all came from one source energy and we're all particles of that? What would that create to really understand that? Not intellectually, but to really know that to be true. And so the invitation I have for myself and for you today is to lean into that and look at what's happening in our world today and how we're looking at people as different from or other than, and what might get created if we were to really begin to question that and to recognize our oneness with not only each other, but with Source. Her third powerful spiritual principle is the only prayer is thank you. Of course, Master Eckhart said many years ago, I don't even know when that is. I'm not always a great reporter of history, but years ago, that if the only prayer we ever say is thank you, it will be enough. And so at that time, when I met Mary Helen and in my 20s, I had been taught that prayer was asking, it was beseeching, please give me this, please change this situation. I still had the idea of a God with skin, a God with personality. And I was praying to this God that seemed up there and out there somewhere, please give me this, please help me with this, please get me through this. And when I heard her say the only prayer is thank you, I realized, as we realize in New Thought, that prayer is really an affirmation of a greater reality. It's not asking for anything. It's acknowledging something that already exists. It's recognizing that when we shift into the frequency of gratitude, life seems to respond and give us more to be grateful for. Isn't that amazing? Simply by shifting into thank you, we can then start to experience the world in a very different way. Now, I want to say something about this because one thing that's in our culture right now, if you haven't heard, is this term toxic positivity. So I think it's really interesting that we can frame that positivity is toxic. The way I'll say it is what we call the spiritual bypass. So what I'm not saying when I say the only prayer is thank you is that we don't have feelings, that we don't have an experience of pain or even sometimes suffering. What we're offering here is, what if we were to say thank you for everything in our life, recognizing that everything is useful for our transformation? Many times we've been so programmed to believe that it's either good or it's bad, that if something that we have called bad is happening in our life, how can we possibly say thank you for that? And so it's not really thank you for, it's let me recognize that I can be the frequency of gratitude in the midst of this. How many times have you looked back on your life and you can see that a painful situation was something that was extremely or incredibly transformational for you? So we've heard shift happens. We know where that phrase came from. And at one point I realized with just a slight shift, I could say fertilizer happens. Even the things that I've called negative have been transformational for me if I allow them to be. So when we shift from wanting to ask or asking some power up there and out there to please bring us or please give us or please bring the world something, to thank you, I think that is the most powerful fundamental shift that we can make. Her fourth spiritual principle is God is within you. Now, I just want to share with you that at this point in my evolution, I don't use the term God is within me. And that is because it implies that there's a God out there that lives within me, or that there's separation in some way. So I would change this, and I know Mary Helen gives me permission to do this. Rather than saying God is within you, I would say you are a perfect emanation, a perfect expression of God. We are God, not that God lives within you. And so, why is that important? You know, when Mary Helen, she was raised in Dallas. She was born in the 1920s. She grew up in a culture that was very much God is up there and out there, and God is something to be feared, right? So for her to say God is within you was revolutionary at the time. And now we're continuing to evolve, and we can say we are perfect expressions of that power. Her fifth principle is nothing outside of you needs to change. Now, this is a big one. Going back to what's happening in our world, we can see, and maybe you have experienced, I certainly have, trying to change the world. Nothing outside of you needs to change. How can that be? I think there's a paradox here. The more I try to change the world, the more I suffer. The more I tune into nothing actually has to change in order for me to be free, the paradox is I do experience freedom, and it seems to help shift the world. So let's take Mary Helen as a perfect example. She was living the principle, nothing outside of her needs to change. So she wasn't trying to change me. She was simply radiating love energy. And because she wasn't trying to change me, I actually was changed. Isn't that incredible? I think many of us have been taught that we must resist something in order to change it. It's so pervasive in our culture that many of us aren't even aware of how much we've been programmed to be in competition with ourselves and with each other. And so this idea that I can unplug from the world and realize that nothing in the world needs to change in order for me to be free, that freedom is already here, it already exists. It's the deeper truth of who and what I am. And when I know that, then suddenly I serve the world. Our beloved Michael Bernard Beckwith says it this way: we are not here to save the world, we're here to serve the new paradigm. And I'm guessing I may have said that in one of my other talks, because when I heard him say that, there was another shift in my life. Oh yeah, even at a subtle level, a small level. You know, I work in the addiction treatment field, and I see so many counselors and therapists trying to help someone get something, get sober, become free, heal their trauma. And if I can just get them there, I can be happy. What if I were to begin to look at everyone as a whole and perfect spiritual being? What if I would begin to look at all the people around me as perfect emanations of the one power? What if nothing needs to change? What if no one needs to change? And then watch what happens. Then I can be of service in the world, in my own journey. When I have moved out of criticism and into love, I started to change. It's so paradoxical, or for me it is. It might not be for you, but for me, my mind thinks I must resist this in order to change. I can't love this about myself or the world because I don't approve of it. Gosh, feel that. Feel into the restriction of judgment. And so maybe you look at a political party and say, they're opposing. I'm opposed to that. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. And so we could debate that. As a matter of fact, we could probably get in political debates and find some place where we disagree with each other. We might be more in alignment than we are different. And I think sometimes, people try to find their tribe. We hear that. I'm going to find my tribe, my like-minded people. Rather than that, what if I could look at the person, the political party, the religion, the group of people, the institution, as not needing to change, and then become curious what needs to change within me? And it's not really change, it's really recognizing my true reality, tapping into that and unlearning all the garbage that I put on top of it. Then I can be a profound service in the world, and I can begin to recognize that I am more than my opinions, and so are you. The fifth principle is everyone is perfect just as they are. Did you see? I already went into that. So those two really go together. Nothing needs to change in the world and everyone is perfect. Wow, everyone is perfect just as they are. What would the world be like? What would my world be like? What would your world be like to really live that? I don't need to change you. I can be a presence, open, curious. I can recognize that when I myself believe that I am perfect and experience myself as perfect, I will experience that for you. And the seventh and final principle that Mary Helen demonstrated, again, she didn't teach. I had someone Google her once. Oh, I need to find these teachings, but she's not Googleable. Is that a word? Because she was a being who was unplugged from, so unplugged from externals that she was just living these truths. I say just living these truths. She was demonstrating them. So the seventh and final principle that I think is the foundation or the core of her teaching is we're not here to become good, but to get real. Now, because I believed I was broken, I thought I needed to be good because I thought I was bad. And I don't know where. I did not grow up in a religion that taught that God was keeping score, but I believed it well into my teenage years and my early 20s. Now, I might not have said that because intellectually I didn't believe it, but somewhere deep within me, I somehow believed there was a God up there and out there that was keeping score and I wasn't going to measure up. And I needed to be good in order to feel worthy of love. Wow. Whew. And when I heard her say, we're not here to get good, to become good, we're here to be real. And one of her favorite passages is from the Velveteen Rabbit, when the Skin Horse asks the rabbit, what is real? And goes on to say, real is something that you become when you get really loved. You become real. And what I want to offer is the more authentic we are to ourselves, the more authentic we are, the more we can be open and authentic with others. And when I say we're here to get real, it doesn't mean I need to tell you what I'm thinking. Real to me has layers of definition. The deepest level for me is who we really are is this whole and perfect spiritual being. And so then the only surrender is actually a surrender into knowing that we're infinite beings. Wow. A lot of us have been taught we need to surrender this or that in our life, but really it's surrendering to that greater reality. And that reality, being that reality in the world, is what not only changes our own individual experience of the world, but then we can start to serve the world in a powerful and profound way. So in closing, what I want to offer is gratitude for being in this exploration with me and for me, and gratitude for my beloved Mary Helen, who came here to demonstrate a greater possibility that love is who and what we are, and that we can be that in the world. I do believe, and I have experienced life as a great experiment. So my invitation for you is to go into the world living these spiritual principles and knowing that you are an infinite being and that you're here to radiate love into the world and see what happens. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for our time together. Peace and blessings.